They didn't hit my son. They didn't scream. They just told the town he was unsafe and watched his world quietly disappear. All it took was 1 week, one object already broken, and a family that knew exactly how to destroy a child without ever looking like the villains. I didn't think 1 week could change a child. That's the lie I told myself while packing my laptop and a single dress shirt, folding them with the careful calm of a woman who believes routine can keep the world steady. I work remote most days, but this trip mattered. A client, a deadline, one of those moments you can't say no to without paying for it later. My parents offered to keep my son. They didn't offer the way people do when they feel obligated. They offered the way people do when they think they're doing you a favor you should be grateful for. "He'll be better here," my mother said, smiling like she was already right. "He needs structure," my father added, not looking up from his coffee. My son stood beside me, backpack slung over one shoulder, pretending to check something on his phone. Evan is 13, quiet in a way that isn't shy, thoughtful in a way that makes adults uncomfortable. He notices things. He always has. "You'll be fine," I told him. "It's just a week." He nodded the way he does when he's already decided not to argue. My parents' house sits a few blocks from the water, same place I grew up, same salt in the air, same creek in the front steps. When I was a kid, I used to think that meant stability. Now I know it just means nothing ever gets questioned. Inside, everything was where it had always been. The framed photos, the carefully dusted shelves, the objects that mattered because someone older had decided they should. On the wall near the back door hung a small brass compass, dull with age, mounted in a wooden frame. It had been there for as long as I could remember. I glanced at it out of habit, then away again. My mother touched Evan's shoulder. "We'll keep him busy," she said. "He needs good influences." I didn't like the way she said it, but I ignored the feeling. I always had. When I hugged Evan goodbye, he held on a second longer than usual. "Call me if you need me," I said. "I won't," he replied, not unkindly, just honest. I left before I could overthink it. The week passed in the usual blur of meetings and hotel rooms that all looked the same after a while. Evan texted once a day, short messages, "Fine, good," ate dinner. I told myself that was normal, that teenage boys don't gush, that he was safe. On the last night, my mother called. "He's doing well," she said. "We've been working on some things." "What things?" I asked. "Oh, just habits," she replied lightly. "Boys need guidance." I let it go. I always did. When I pulled into their driveway 7 days later, the porch light was on even though it wasn't dark yet. The curtains were drawn. Everything looked normal in the way things do right before you realize you're the only one who doesn't know what happened. My mother opened the door with her guest smile, the one she uses when people from church come over, the one that says everything is fine and always has been. "There you are," she sang. "Evan, your mom's here." My father stood behind her, hands in his pockets, neutral as a wall. And then Evan appeared. He didn't run toward me. He didn't smile. He didn't launch into the rapid-fire story he usually saves up when we've been apart for more than a grocery line. He just stood there, backpack clutched against his chest, eyes lowered like he'd dropped something fragile and didn't trust himself to bend down. Something in my chest tightened. "Hey," I said softly, "I missed you." He hugged me back, but his body stayed stiff, like he wasn't sure where to put his arms. "He's tired," my mother said quickly. "We kept him busy." I looked at my son's face. This wasn't tired, this was guarded. "Thank you for watching him," I said automatically, because I was raised to say thank you before I understood what I was thanking people for. "Of course," my mother replied. "Family takes care of family." My father nodded once. "Drive safe." That was it. No updates, no explanations, no warning that something had shifted. On the drive home, the car filled with the familiar hum of the road. Evan stared out the window, watching the water flash between houses. "So," I said gently, "how was it?" "Fine," he said. Just one word. "Practiced." You sleep okay? Yeah. You have fun? Sure. Each answer landed flat, like he was checking boxes he didn't believe in. I tried again. Did you go sailing with the club this week? There was a pause. His fingers tightened around the strap of his backpack. I'm not in it anymore, he said. The words hit me so hard I had to grip the steering wheel to stay steady. What do you mean you're not in it anymore? They asked me not to come back, he said. Calm. Too calm. Why? Silence. I kept my voice even as something inside me started to fracture. Evan, talk to me. He swallowed. I don't want to. That scared me more than any accusation could have. We drove the rest of the way in silence. At home, I cooked dinner because that's what mothers do when they don't know where else to put their fear. Evan ate a few bites, methodical, like eating was a task he'd been assigned. Finally, I set my fork down. Okay, I said, tell me what happened. His shoulders rose and fell, then his face crumpled, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to let the truth through. They said I can't be trusted, he whispered. My stomach went cold. Who said that? Grandma, he said, and Grandpa didn't say no. I waited. They said I broke something, he continued, that it shows how I react under pressure. What did they say you broke? He hesitated, then said it. The compass. I pictured the brass compass on the wall, the one no one ever touched, the one that had always been there. They told people, he added quietly. They said it was about safety. I felt something shift, slow and heavy, like the first movement of a storm you don't see coming until it's already overhead. I reached across the table and took his hand. We'll talk about it, I said. All of it. He nodded, but his eyes stayed down. Later that night, after he went to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen and stared at the empty wall in my mind where certainty used to hang. I still believed, in that moment, that this was a misunderstanding, a mistake, something that could be cleared up with a conversation. I didn't know yet that the story had been written before I ever left town. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because Evan was crying. He wasn't. That would have been easier. He slept the way people do after they've decided not to fight anymore. Quiet. Still. Like he was afraid that moving too much might make things worse. I lay in my bed listening to the house settle, replaying the drive home over and over. The way his answers sounded rehearsed, the way his shoulders stayed tight even when I hugged him, the way he said they asked me not to come back like it was weather, not rejection. Morning came with the thin gray light that always makes things feel unfinished. Evan came into the kitchen already dressed, backpack on like he was preparing for a place he wasn't going. You don't have school today, I said gently. He paused. Oh. He didn't sit down, just stood there, waiting for instructions. Come eat, I said. He obeyed. Not because he was hungry, but because he didn't want to be difficult. That realization hurt more than anything else. While he ate, I watched him the way you watch someone crossing thin ice. His movements were careful, controlled. Every choice looked like it had been filtered through a new question. Will this get me in trouble? Do you want to tell me what they said? I asked. He stared at his cereal. Not really. I nodded. Okay. The relief on his face was immediate and heartbreaking. After breakfast, he went to his room and closed the door. Not hard, not angry, just closed. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, then picked up my phone. I called the sailing club. The woman who answered sounded kind in the practiced way people do when they believe they're being reasonable. We had some concerns, she said. What concerns? I asked. She hesitated. About Evan's judgment. Based on what? We were informed that he damaged a piece of equipment and didn't come forward right away. That equipment wasn't the club's, I said. I understand, she replied smoothly, but when safety is involved, perception matters. Perception. So you didn't witness anything, I said. You were told? There was a pause. We trust the adults who brought it to us. I thanked her and hung up before my voice could betray me. Next, I called my parents. My mother answered on the second ring, cheerful. "Did Evan tell you?" she asked. "Tell me what?" I said. She sighed, the way she does when she thinks she's dealing with someone slow. "We were worried," she said. "He didn't handle the situation well." "What situation?" "The compass," she said. "It was damaged. And he wasn't honest." My hand tightened around the phone. "He says he didn't break it." "Well," she replied, "he was the only one near it." "That doesn't mean anything." "It means enough," she said calmly. "Lena, we weren't trying to punish him. We were trying to teach him responsibility." "You told other people," I said. "They needed to know," she replied. "Safety is important." "You told them my son can't be trusted. He needs to learn boundaries," she said, "and respect." There it was, that word, the one she always used when what she meant was obedience. My father came on the line, his voice flat. "We handled it." "No," I said. "You didn't." Silence. "This isn't a courtroom," my mother said sharply. "You're overreacting." I hung up. Evan didn't ask about the calls. He spent the day in his room, reading, reorganizing his desk, lining things up like order could keep chaos away. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from a parent I barely knew. Just wanted to check in. "Hope everything's okay with Evan." Another followed. "We heard some things. Let me know if you want to talk." They hadn't heard facts. They'd heard a version. By evening, Evan sat beside me on the couch, hoodie pulled up, eyes on the floor. "Mom," he said quietly, "did I mess everything up?" "No," I said immediately. He nodded anyway, like he wasn't convinced. "I tried to fix it," he admitted after a moment. "Fix what?" "The compass," he said. "I thought if it looked okay, it would stop." My chest tightened. "You touched it." He nodded. "I didn't break it at first, I swear. It was already loose. But when I tried to put it back..." His voice trailed off. I pulled him into my arms, and this time he didn't resist. In that moment, something settled inside me. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't discipline gone wrong. This was a story being shaped around a child who didn't know how to defend himself, and I was done letting it stand. I didn't know yet how far it would go. I didn't know what it would cost. I only knew one thing. I wasn't going to ask permission. The next few days felt like living inside a rumor, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't confront you directly, but changes the way people look at you in passing, the way smiles hesitate, the way conversations stop half a second too early. Evan didn't go to school. I told them he was sick. It wasn't a lie, just not the kind they expect. He stayed home, moving carefully through the house like he was afraid to knock something else over just by existing. Every sound made him flinch. Every notification on my phone made his shoulders tense. On the third morning, he asked, "Do you think they hate me?" I set my coffee down so slowly my hand shook. "No," I said. "I think they're confused." That wasn't the truth either, but it was closer than saying what I was starting to believe. That afternoon, I went to my parents' house alone. I didn't tell Evan where I was going. I didn't want him carrying the weight of whatever this turned into. My mother opened the door with the same practiced smile. "You look tired," she said. "So does your grandson," I replied. Her smile tightened. The compass was gone. The empty space on the wall near the back door stood out like a missing tooth. "Where is it?" I asked. "We took it down," she said. "It's damaged. No point displaying something broken." I stared at the bare spot. "When did it break?" She waved a hand. "Recently." "How recently?" Her eyes flicked away for a moment. Just a moment. "This week." I didn't argue. Not yet. My father stood in the doorway to the kitchen, arms crossed. "You didn't need to tell people," I said. "We absolutely did," my mother replied. "Lena, you're being emotional." "No," I said. "You're being careless with a child's name." She scoffed. "Oh, please, this will blow over. These things always do." For who? I asked. She didn't answer. I left before the conversation could turn into what it always did, me defending myself, them correcting my tone. On the way home, my phone buzzed again, a message from Evan's club coach. We're revisiting some policies. I'll be in touch. Policies, not people, not kids. That night, Evan sat at the table doing homework he hadn't been assigned. I don't want to fall behind, he said. You're not, I told him. He shrugged. Just in case. I watched him erase the same line 3 times until the paper tore. Evan, I said gently, you didn't do anything wrong. He nodded. Again. The same way he had been all week. Later, after he went to bed, I opened my laptop and started reading. Old emails, old family messages, anything that mentioned that house, that wall, that compass. That's when I remembered. It wasn't sudden. It was the kind of memory that surfaces slowly, like something rising from deep water. That compass hadn't always been theirs. It had been my grandfather's, my mother's father. The only adult in that family who never corrected the way I took up space. He used to keep it in his study. Let me hold it when I was little. Told me it wasn't about knowing where you're going, just knowing where you are. After he died, things moved around. Objects changed hands quietly. No announcements, no discussions. I stared at the screen, a cold certainty forming in my chest. This wasn't about Evan breaking something. This was about who was allowed to be flawed and who wasn't. The next morning, I made a call I hadn't planned on making, not to a lawyer, not yet, to someone who remembered things the way they actually were. When Evan came into the kitchen, I was already dressed. Where are you going? He asked. I'm going to ask some questions, I said. About me? About us, I replied. He nodded, then hesitated. Am I in trouble? I crossed the room and knelt in front of him, meeting his eyes. No, I said. You're protected. He didn't look like he believed me, but he would. I promised myself that, because whatever story they thought they'd finished telling, I was about to reopen it. And this time, I wasn't listening quietly. The office smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner, not the polished kind, the kind that settles into places where things have been stored longer than anyone remembers why they mattered. Ruth looked up from a folder when I walked in. She hadn't changed much. Same sharp eyes, same posture that made you feel like sitting up straighter without being told. I wondered when you'd come, she said. I sat across from her and placed my hands flat on the desk so she wouldn't see them shake. My son's name is being passed around town, I said, and it started in my parents' house. Ruth didn't interrupt. She never did. They say he broke something, I continued. Something that apparently proves he can't be trusted. What was it? She asked. A compass. Her eyebrow lifted just enough to notice. The brass one, I added, mounted in a wooden frame, hung near the back door. Ruth leaned back slowly. That compass, she said, has been damaged for years. The room went very quiet. What do you mean? I asked. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. Not thick, not dramatic, just paper. Your grandmother kept records, she said. Not sentimental ones, practical ones. She slid a photocopy across the desk, a repair receipt, dated 3 years earlier. The name at the top wasn't Evan's, it was my brother's. I stared at it until the words blurred. He dropped it, Ruth continued calmly. Or maybe his son did. Doesn't matter. It cracked along the seam. Still worked, but the casing loosened. I remember because your grandmother was furious. She never said anything to me, I said. Ruth gave a small, humorless smile. She rarely did. I swallowed. So it was already broken. Yes, Ruth said, and it wasn't removed from the wall then, only now. I sat back, the pieces aligning with a sickening ease. When Evan touched it, I said slowly, it was already compromised. Ruth nodded, which means the story doesn't start with him. I pressed my fingers into my palms. Why would they do this? Ruth studied me for a moment. because patterns repeat when no one stops them. She paused. Do you remember how your parents used to talk about you when you were his age? I did. Too sensitive, too emotional, too much. They never said I was bad. They said I needed correction. Did you know, Ruth went on, that Compass was never meant to stay in that house? I looked up. What do you mean? It was left to you, she said. Not formally, not loudly, but clearly. My breath caught. Your grandfather wanted you to have it, Ruth said. He said you needed reminding that direction isn't the same as obedience. I laughed once, sharp and brittle. They never told me that. No, she replied. They wouldn't. I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat like it was something alive. Evan was at the kitchen table when I walked in, lining up his pencils by length. Hey, he said. Hey, I replied. I sat across from him and slid the paper toward him. What's this? He asked. Proof, I said, that you didn't break anything first. He read it slowly, twice. Then he shook his head. It doesn't matter. It does, I said firmly. They already decided, he replied. I could show them this and they'd still think it was my fault. I closed my eyes for a moment. That's why this isn't about convincing them, I said. It's about stopping them. He looked at me, searching my face. Are you mad? He asked quietly. Yes, I said, but not at you. That night, I started documenting everything. Dates, calls, messages, names. I didn't respond to anyone. I didn't explain. I didn't defend. I learned something important growing up in that family. The more you talk, the more they rewrite. A week passed, then another. The sailing club emailed again. Polite, vague, non-committal. Evan stopped asking when things would go back to normal. Instead, he asked, Do you think I should apologize? That was the moment something in me hardened completely. No, I said. You will not apologize for surviving someone else's story. I made one more call, not to confront, not to accuse, to ask what else had been put in writing without me knowing. Ruth listened, then said something that changed the temperature of the room. There's more, she said, and I think it's time you saw it. I felt the ground shift beneath me. More what? I asked. Paper, she replied, the kind that doesn't forget. I hung up and stood there in the kitchen, staring at the wall where nothing was hanging. I finally understood. They hadn't reacted. They'd followed a script, and scripts only work when no one reads ahead. Ruth asked me to come back the next morning. Not urgently, not dramatically, just the way people do when they already know the answer and want you prepared before you hear it. I dropped Evan at a friend's house, one of the few families that hadn't gone quiet. He didn't ask why. He just said he'd be home before dark and thanked me like he was older than 13. The office looked the same as it had the day before. Same folders, same smell, same quiet that felt deliberate. Ruth didn't waste time. Your grandparents kept more than repair receipts, she said, opening a thick binder. They kept correspondence. She slid it toward me. Emails, printed, labeled by year. Not casual notes, not family chatter. Messages sent to schools, clubs, parents. Always polite, always framed as concern. Just wanted to flag something. We're not accusing, just being cautious. Better safe than sorry. I felt my throat tighten. This started before Evan, I said. Yes, Ruth replied. It started with you. I looked up sharply. When you were his age, she continued, your parents contacted your teachers about your emotional regulation. They told people they were worried you might struggle in group environments. I stared at the pages, memories rearranging themselves. The times I wasn't picked, the teachers who watched me more closely, the way I learned to stay quiet because quiet didn't get corrected. They did it again when you were divorced, Ruth said. Different words, same shape. I let out a slow breath. So this wasn't a reaction. No, she said, it was consistency. She turned another page. This, she said, is where it matters. It was a copy of a document I didn't recognize at first. Typed, formal, dated years earlier. Your grandfather amended his estate plan near the end, Ruth explained. Not the main document, a supplement. I skimmed the page, my heart beginning to race. It didn't list money. It didn't list Evan. It listed responsibility, a clause about management, about public conduct, about statements made to third parties involving minors. I read it twice before it landed. They violated this, I said quietly. Yes, Ruth replied, multiple times. But I didn't know, I said. I didn't agree to anything. You didn't have to, she said. This wasn't about consent, it was about restraint. I laughed softly, without humor. They've never been good at that. Ruth closed the binder. You don't have to do anything with this. I looked at her. That's not true. She nodded. No, it isn't. When I got home, Evan was already there, sitting on the floor, back against the couch, building something small out of scrap wood he'd found in the garage. What is it? I asked. A stand, he said, for my phone, so it doesn't fall. He tested it, adjusted the angle, tested it again. I sat beside him. Do you remember the compass? I asked. He stiffened. Yeah. It wasn't yours to break, I said, and it wasn't new. He looked at me, confused. It was already damaged, I continued, and it was supposed to be mine. He frowned. Then why? Because, I said gently, sometimes people decide who needs to be corrected before anything even happens. He thought about that. So I was just... Convenient? He asked. I nodded. Yes. He didn't cry. He just sat there, turning the piece of wood over in his hands. Does that mean it's over? He asked. No, I said. It means it's changing. That night, my phone buzzed again, a message from my mother. We need to talk. People are asking questions. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a document and started listing dates. Not feelings, not explanations, just facts. Who said what, to whom, and when. I realized something then. They weren't afraid of being wrong. They were afraid of losing control of the narrative. And narratives collapse the moment someone stops reacting and starts recording. I didn't know how long this would take. I didn't know what it would cost. But for the first time since this started, I knew exactly where I was standing. And that was enough to move forward. Silence changed the way people spoke to me. When I stopped responding, the messages shifted tone. Concern turned into irritation. Polite check-ins became pointed questions. The same people who had been so careful with their words suddenly wanted answers. My mother called twice a day. I didn't pick up. My father sent one message. This has gone far enough. I read it once and put my phone face down on the counter. Evan noticed everything. He didn't ask why the phone kept lighting up. He didn't ask why I stopped driving past my parents' house on the way to the store. He adapted the way kids do when they sense the rules have changed, but no one has explained them yet. He stayed close. Not clingy, just present, sitting at the kitchen table while I worked, reading on the couch while I answered emails, existing quietly in the same space like he was afraid distance might make things worse. One afternoon, he asked, "Did Grandma always talk about me like that?" The question landed softly, carefully. "No," I said, not out loud. He nodded. "So, about you?" I didn't answer right away. "Yes," I said finally, "about me." He absorbed that in silence. A few days later, the school called. The assistant principal asked if I had time to come in and clear some things up. I said yes. Evan stayed home. I didn't want him in that building yet, not until I knew what kind of air he'd be walking into. The office smelled like disinfectant and old carpet. The assistant principal smiled too much. The counselor sat with her hands folded, eyes cautious. "We're just trying to understand the situation," the assistant principal said. "I understand it," I replied. "You acted on information without verification." The smile faded. "We received concerns from trusted adults," she said. "Trusted by whom?" I asked. There was a pause. "We're not accusing Evan of anything," the counselor said quickly, "but patterns matter." Patterns created by repetition, I said, not evidence. They exchanged a look. We're willing to review, the assistant principal said, but you should know this has already circulated. I know, I said. That's why we're here. I left with no apology, no resolution, just the promise of a review. Outside, I sat in my car and let the anger settle into something colder. That night, Evan stood in the doorway of my bedroom. Are they mad at you? He asked. Yes, I said. Because of me? No, I said firmly. Because I stopped letting them speak for me. He thought about that. Does it work? He asked. Eventually, I said, but it gets worse before it gets quiet. The next message came from my brother. You're blowing this out of proportion. I stared at the screen, then deleted it. Another followed. He's a good kid, but you have to admit he's sensitive. There it was. The same word, different generation. I forwarded the message to Ruth without comment. She replied an hour later. Keep everything. 2 weeks passed. The sailing club sent a short email stating they were reassessing internal decisions. No invitation, no reinstatement, just distance. Evan stopped asking when he could go back. Instead, he asked, if I don't, is that okay? Yes, I said, you don't need them. He nodded, but I could see the question behind his eyes. Who needs me? One evening, while I was cooking, he said, Grandpa told me not to tell you something. My hand stilled over the stove. What? I asked carefully. That if I said anything, you'd get upset and it would prove I can't handle pressure. I turned off the burner. When did he say that? The second day you were gone, Evan replied. After the compass fell? Did it fall? I asked. He shook his head. It was already loose. I just picked it up. I closed my eyes. What else did he say? I asked. That it was better if everyone thought I made a mistake, Evan said, because mistakes are easier to forgive than being difficult. Something inside me went very still. They told you that? I asked. He nodded. Grandma said it would blow over faster if I didn't argue. That was the moment the story snapped into focus. This wasn't discipline. This was containment. They weren't correcting Evan. They were minimizing him, shrinking him, teaching him that survival meant silence. I pulled him into a hug, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't hesitate. I'm sorry, I whispered. You shouldn't have had to carry that. He leaned into me. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, you'd be safer. My throat closed. No, I said. You don't protect me by disappearing. That night, I sent one email. Not to my parents, not to my brother, to Ruth. I'm ready. Her reply came back minutes later. Then we stop reacting and start formalizing. I sat at the table long after Evan went to bed, organizing files, labeling folders, turning lived experience into record. Something strange happened as I worked. The fear drained away. In its place was clarity. They had always relied on one thing, that I would want peace more than truth. They were wrong, and the quiet they were about to experience wasn't the kind they controlled. It was the kind that follows when paper starts speaking louder than people. Paper has a sound, not when you read it, but when you stack it, when you align dates, when you clip messages together and realize they tell a story, even when no one is speaking. Ruth came to my house this time. She sat at the table with a legal pad and a pen she didn't click, which told me everything I needed to know about how serious she was. We don't accuse, she said. We don't explain. We don't argue. Then what do? I asked. We document, she replied, and we notify. She laid it out calmly, step by step. Letters that asked for clarification, not confrontation. Requests for written bases. Copies sent to more than one place so nothing could be quietly misplaced. I listened and nodded, my hands wrapped around a mug I'd reheated twice without drinking. This isn't a lawsuit, Ruth said. It's a record. I understood the difference. That afternoon, the first letter went out. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't mention blame. It asked for the timeline of events, the source of concerns, and the exact language used to communicate them to third parties. By evening, my mother called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail anyway. "This is unnecessary," she said, her voice tight. "You're embarrassing us." I deleted it. The next day, the school responded, carefully worded, non-committal. They acknowledged receiving concerns and agreed to review the basis for their actions. The sailing club followed, shorter, less confident. Evan watched me work from the couch, knees pulled up, arms wrapped around them. "Are we in trouble?" he asked. "No," I said. "We're being precise." He thought about that. "Is that better?" "Yes," I said. "It's safer." A week passed, then another. People stopped calling. Not because they believed us, but because the situation no longer felt comfortable to comment on. Silence spread outward, the way it does when no one wants their name attached to the wrong side of a story. One afternoon, Ruth called. "They responded," she said. My heart kicked hard once, then steadied. "And?" I asked. "There's acknowledgement," she said. "Not apology, but acknowledgement." "That's enough," I said. "For now," she agreed. The next letter went out the same day. This one referenced the supplement. Not threatening, not emotional, just a reminder of the conditions attached to management and the importance of compliance. That night, my father showed up at my door. He stood on the porch like he wasn't sure whether to knock. I opened it anyway. "This is going too far," he said without greeting. "No," I replied. "It's finally going far enough." He exhaled sharply. "You're turning paperwork into a weapon." I met his eyes. "You turned concern into one first." He flinched, just slightly. "We were trying to help," he said. "You were trying to control," I replied. He looked past me into the house, searching for Evan. "He doesn't need to see this," my father said. "You mean he doesn't need to see you challenged?" I said. My father's jaw tightened. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but not the way you think." He left without another word. That night, Evan asked, "Is Grandpa mad?" "Yes," I said. "Is that bad?" "No," I replied. "It's information." 2 days later, Ruth called again. "They've been removed," she said. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair. "From what?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Management," she replied, "effective immediately." I closed my eyes. There was no cheering, no release, just a long exhale I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "They're not happy," Ruth added. "I know," I said. "And there may be consequences," she continued. "Social ones." "I know," I said again. When I told Evan, he didn't smile. He just nodded slowly. "So it's over?" he asked. "No," I said, "but it's different." That evening, an email arrived from the sailing club. Brief, formal. They were correcting records. They were reopening eligibility. They invited Evan to return if he wished. I showed it to him. He read it once, then set the phone down. "I don't think I want to," he said. "Okay," I replied. "I liked it," he added, "but I don't want to pretend nothing happened." I reached for his hand. "You don't have to." He squeezed my fingers just once. Later, as I cleaned up dinner, I realized something. They had assumed I would fight loudly. They had prepared for tears, for arguments, for public scenes. They hadn't prepared for quiet insistence, for patience, for paper. And now that the ground had shifted, they were standing on it without the authority they'd always relied on. The story they'd controlled had stopped responding to them, and that was the most unsettling outcome of all. The aftermath didn't arrive all at once. It spread slowly like fog rolling in from the water, settling into places people didn't expect to feel cold. The first change was practical. Mail that used to go to my parents started coming to me. Notices, statements, requests for signatures. Nothing dramatic, just proof that authority had shifted hands quietly and permanently. My mother stopped calling. Not immediately. At first, she sent clipped messages, neutral ones, updates that didn't ask questions and didn't offer warmth. Then those stopped too. My brother tried once. "This didn't have to get ugly," he wrote. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Ugly was what happens when people pretend damage didn't count because it was done politely. The town adjusted the way towns always do. Nobody apologized publicly. Nobody admitted they'd been wrong. But conversations changed. Evan's name stopped being followed by that pause, the one where people decide how cautious to be. A few parents reached out quietly. One wrote, "I shouldn't have assumed." Another said, "Kids shouldn't pay for adult conflicts. None of them asked to talk about my parents." That told me everything. Evan started leaving the house again. At first, just walks, down to the water, around the block, short routes that kept familiar things in view, then longer ones, bike rides. A trip to the hardware store where the cashier smiled and didn't look away. He came home one afternoon and said, "No one stared." I nodded. "Good." He waited, then added, "I think that means they're bored." I smiled despite myself. Probably. The sailing club followed through on their correction. They didn't announce it. They just updated their records and moved on. The coach sent one more email, offering Evan his spot back. He didn't respond. Instead, he asked me if we could fix the old kayak in the garage. "I don't need a team," he said. "I just want to be on the water." We worked on it together over a few weekends, sanded the rough spots, replaced the cracked handle, took our time. No one judged. No one watched. That mattered. The hardest part came later. It was a Sunday afternoon when I ran into my parents at the grocery store. They were standing near the produce, discussing avocados like nothing had changed. My mother saw me first. Her face went tight, then smooth. "Lena," she said, "how are you?" "Fine," I replied. She nodded as if that was acceptable. "Is Evan okay?" she asked. The question was careful, measured, almost kind. "Yes," I said, "he is." She hesitated. "We were only trying to help." I met her eyes. "You were trying to decide who he was." Her mouth opened, then closed. My father stared at the floor. "We've been through a lot," my mother said quietly, "as a family." I felt something strange then. Not anger, not satisfaction, distance. "Yes," I said. "And now we're through it?" I walked away before she could say anything else. At home that night, Evan asked where I'd been. "The store," I said. "Did you see them?" he asked. "Yes." He thought for a moment. "Did they say sorry?" "No," I said. He nodded. "I didn't think they would." "Does that bother you?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not really." Then after a pause, "I just wanted them to stop." "They did," I said. He leaned back against the couch, eyes on the ceiling. "I don't think I need them to like me," he said. "I just needed them to stop telling people who I am." I reached over and squeezed his shoulder. That night, as I cleaned up the kitchen, I realized something else. They hadn't lost everything. They still had their house, their routines, their friends. What they'd lost was quieter. They no longer got to define reality and expect everyone else to repeat it. And that loss followed them everywhere. Evan started school again the following week, not full days at first, just mornings, just enough to rebuild trust with the building, not the people. On his second day back, he came home and said, "It wasn't bad. That was a victory." The story people remembered began to blur. That was the final shift, not justice, not triumph, just time doing what it does best when lies aren't fed anymore, letting them starve. The water was calm that morning, not perfectly still, but steady, the kind of steady that lets you trust where you're putting your weight. Evan and I stood at the edge of the small public dock just after sunrise. The air smelled like salt and wet wood. Gulls cried somewhere overhead, sharp and ordinary. He carried the paddle. I carried the life vests. We didn't talk much on the drive over. We didn't need to. The kayak slid into the water without a sound. Evan steadied it the way he always had. Careful, deliberate, checking twice before committing his weight. I watched him from the dock, noticing things I hadn't let myself notice during the worst weeks. How his shoulders relaxed when he wasn't being watched. How his breathing evened out when no one was evaluating him. "Ready?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah." He pushed off, slow and controlled, then dipped the paddle into the water. Once, twice. The kayak moved forward, straight and sure. I sat on the dock and watched him go. Not far. Just out to where the water darkened slightly and then back again. No audience, no expectations, just motion. When he returned, he looked lighter. Not happy in the loud way, grounded. He pulled the kayak up and sat beside me, legs dangling over the edge. "I like it better like this," he said. "Like what?" I asked. "Without someone deciding what it means," he replied. I nodded. Me too. We stayed there a while, watching the sun climb, letting the morning finish becoming itself. On the way home, he asked a question he hadn't asked before. "Mom," he said, staring out the window, "if it happens again, you know, with other people." "If what happens again?" I asked. "If someone says things," he said, "about me or about us." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to be honest without making promises the world doesn't keep. "We'll handle it," I said finally. "Together." He was quiet for a moment. "You won't wait, will you?" he asked. "Like before." "No," I said. "I won't." He nodded once, satisfied. School settled into a new rhythm. Evan attended full days again. Not every friendship came back. A few never would. But the ones that mattered found their way without being forced. He joined a different club, smaller, less impressive on paper. They built things, fixed things, took them apart and put them back together without anyone ranking the results. He came home one afternoon with grease on his hands and said, "I like it when mistakes don't get announced." I smiled. Me too. My parents remained absent. Not loudly, not dramatically, just absent. At first, the space they left felt strange, like a room you keep expecting someone to walk into. Then it started to feel intentional. Peace has a sound. It's quieter than people expect. One evening, as I folded laundry, Evan sat on the floor sorting socks by size. "You know," he said, not looking up, "I don't think they were mad at me." I paused. "What do you mean?" "I think they were scared," he said, "of me not being what they wanted." The insight caught me off guard. "Maybe," I said. He matched 2 socks and set them aside. "That's okay. They don't get to decide anymore." "No," I agreed. "They don't." Later that night, after he went to bed, I stood in the hallway outside his room and listened to him breathe, even, unafraid, the way children should sleep. I thought about the version of myself who would have tried to smooth this over, who would have explained, apologized, negotiated, who would have accepted blame just to keep the peace. That woman wouldn't have protected him. This one did. A few weeks later, I found the old compass at the back of a drawer in my parents' house when I went to collect the last of my things. They weren't home. They hadn't asked me to come. It was just time. The brass was dull, the casing still loose. I held it for a moment, then set it back down. I didn't need it. Direction isn't something you hang on a wall. That night, Evan asked why I looked thoughtful. "I was thinking about how people try to teach lessons," I said. He snorted. "They're bad at it." "Some are," I agreed. He considered that, then said, "I learned something anyway." "What did you learn?" I asked. "That if someone tells a story about you long enough, it doesn't make it true," he said. "It just means they're scared of what happens if you speak." I felt my throat tighten. "That's a good lesson," I said. He shrugged. "I had a good teacher." I turned off the light and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle. I didn't fix everything. I didn't restore what was lost. But I did one thing right. When the story tried to shrink my child, I refused to let it. And that refusal changed the ending. I didn't win by being louder. I won by being present. By choosing my child over comfort, truth over peace, and silence over permission. Some families teach obedience, others teach survival. But the ones worth keeping teach this: no one gets to decide who you are, not even the people who raised you.